ashen terrain, and a sky filled with falling white. This land lies on the edge of a vast expanse of twisting roads and caverns deep beneath the earth. The ash has fallen here for many years, yet it never ceases. A snowfield of debris. But this ash does not come from any volcanic source. Rather, it comes from decomposition. A corpse, larger than any other creature you'll find down here. It belonged to a being the world has long forgotten. A worm. A massive beast that carved its way through dirt and soil, rock and boulder, crevice and mountain, to make its way here. And at the end of its life, it rested. But what is the end of a life for a creature such as this, if not another beginning? It possessed the power of foresight, and placed itself among the higher beings of this world. It craved devotion. It changed its form to better resemble the creatures dwelling within these caverns, and expanded the minds of several species, granting them sapience in exchange for devotion. He was bright, radiant, and offered the creatures of this land a kingdom that would last for eternity. Those beneath his watchful eye believed the entire world to be his creation. They offered him idols for worship. In turn, he carved the land for them, paving roadways and laying the foundation for an eternal rule. Dark and light. Two powers existing in opposition. One seeks to consume all it touches. The other seeks to bask others in warmth, to enlighten and to guide. But if light is that of sight, what happens when that same light blinds? Another higher being, once worshipped by those it had created, had been left behind, but it would not be forgotten. It stirred its influence within the minds of those who had served the king. Its influence was so intense, so all-consuming, that it shattered those it encroached upon. The king sought to contain it, and so a vessel was made to stop the spread of the being's influence. The dark was turned to, and the pure vessel was created. However, the vessel was not quite as pure as one would be led to believe. Corrupted by an idea instilled, it too became subject to the influence of the light. And now, held and bound by those that dream, it stirs, preparing to awaken once again. The kingdom lies in ruin. The king has vanished. The void stirs, and the ancient light calls. It is a tale of sacrifice, of dark, of light, of pilgrimage, of death, of dream, of nightmare. This is the story of Hollow Knight. Long before the Kingdom of Hallownest was founded, there existed a civilization deep within the trenches, where even darkness itself could become lost in the depths of the void. The Abyss. Situated beside the Sea of Void, this was the origin point of a civilization that not only held the void in deep devotion, but possessed an almost spiritual understanding of it. They hoped for the void to take away their suffering, to cleanse them, and make them whole. It was in this very place that the mastery of soul was achieved. The same force that animates a bug's body could also be harnessed to cast spells, among many other things. To what extent this civilization had mastered soul remains unclear, but they appear to have been practitioners of forbidden arts, hidden away within the darkness below. Eventually, their civilization expanded throughout Hallownest. Many structures found in present-day Hallownest can be traced back to these ancient people. They appear to have been immense in size, and preserve their knowledge within arcane eggs, stone vessels whose designs were so intricate that the information contained within them can't be extracted without damaging them. Because of this, much of what they knew remains a mystery. How this civilization came to an end is unclear. It may be that their worship of the void led to their inevitable destruction, that the very darkness they revered swallowed them whole, allowing them to achieve their dream, to be consumed by the dark itself. But there is another possibility, that the people of the civilization were not consumed by the dark, but eradicated by the light. The Dream Realm, a plane that exists far beyond the physical world, is formed from fragments of light known as essence. It carries within it the thoughts and memories of both the living and the dead. The Moth Tribe, a people capable of shaping these very dreams, were, like the beings of Hallownest, influenced, or in their case, created by a higher being, another being of light, the Radiance, a creature whose brilliance surpasses even that of essence itself. As a being of light, it is the natural enemy of the void. Perhaps the ancient civilization was destroyed not by the darkness they worshipped, but by the light that stood in opposition to it. Either way, by the time Hallownest rose to power, the ancient civilization had all but vanished. Their relics and architecture were lost to time. Speaking of the Radiance, this higher being is responsible for much of Hallownest's suffering. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Pale King, the worm who carved his way into Hallownest, and carved the entire kingdom into existence as we know it. He held a certain fascination with the void. He studied it extensively, and built a lighthouse meant to keep the Sea of Void at bay. Even now, despite the ruins of this once great kingdom, his workshop can still be found, hidden within the darkness. This study of the void would eventually prove useful, as all he had learned would one day lead to the kingdom's salvation. Though, perhaps later rather than sooner. Maybe it was due to his foresight, or the way he reshaped the land into the kingdom it became, but nearly all who resided within these lands came to worship the Pale King. Even the Mushroom Tribe chose to follow him specifically because of his ability to see the future. There were some who resisted his rule, despite all he had done, however. Rather than fully submitting to the king, the Mantis tribe and the Spider tribe chose to remain independent. More than this, the Spider tribe was outright hostile toward Hallownest. Because of this, a truce was formed between the king and the Mantis tribe. They would retain their sovereignty, and in exchange, they would keep the beasts of Deepnest in check. Every king needs a queen, and so the White Lady, another of the Pale Higher Beings, became his wife. The Crossroads, the City of Tears, the Queen's Gardens, the Stagways, all of these were built for the kingdom's citizens, and for a time, the Bugs of Hallownest knew prosperity. The Crossroads bustled with travelers from all across the land. Even now, the wagons of merchants can still be found lining the streets. Also known as the City at the Kingdom's Heart, the City of Tears served as Hallownest's capital. Pilgrim's Way, the main path leading to the city, stretched across the kingdom, through forests and fog, until it finally opened into this beautiful blue-hued landscape. Lurien the Watcher, an influential figure within the city, served as its eyes, watching over the kingdom's citizens and the travelers who came and went, ensuring the territory remained safe. I briefly mentioned the Fog just now, and Fog Canyon is home to Monomon, the teacher, a lead researcher and scholar within Hallownest. She studied many things here alongside her apprentice, Quirrell. Leader of the Spider tribe was Hera the Beast, a weaver originating from a faraway land who became partner to the sire of Deepnest. He would eventually pass away, leaving Hera as the sole ruler. The Radiance, the Pale King, and the White Lady are not the only higher beings within this world. Others exist that helped shape Hallownest, and the greater world beyond it, as we understand it. One of these beings is Un. Un is responsible for creating nearly, if not all, life within Greenpath. From her dream, the Mosskin were born, and she herself was worshipped at the edge of the lake that bears her name. There is also a creature hidden within the abyss that appears connected to the mysterious fluid known as lifeblood. While it is likely a higher being in its own right, very little is known about it beyond that. Moving back to the Radiance, the very same higher being that created the Moth tribe, they had long since turned their backs on their creator, choosing instead to worship the Pale King. Soon, the tribe was moved to the Resting Grounds, place of the dead where they would serve as caretakers. And so, the only place of worship that remained for the Radiance stood high above Hallownest itself. A lone, bent statue, all that remained of the once great light of dreams, sat atop the kingdom's crown. And just like that, the Radiance was forgotten. But not for long. Through force, if she had to, the Radiance would return. Traces of her memory still remained, and soon they began to spread throughout the kingdom. She appeared to the citizens of Hallownest within their dreams, dreams that completely shattered the minds of those who received them. Those visions turned their victims into slaves, unwilling vessels bound to the Radiance's will. Those affected by the dreams fought desperately to resist her influence, but despite their efforts, the sickness soon gave rise to the infection. Plague that scarred the once great kingdom, and slowly brought it to ruin. They attempted every ritual that could halt its spread, yet the infection continued, tearing the kingdom apart from the inside out. Hegemal, Ogrim, Isma, Drya, and Zemir, the 5 great knights who served the king, were powerful beyond measure. Yet, not even they could stop its spread. And so, the king devised a plan. The Void. It stood naturally opposed to the light, consuming all that it touched. Vessels were created by the king and queen, born deep within the abyss. Because they were born there, the Void had entered their shells and became a part of them. Countless vessels were created in an attempt to find a suitable host, one capable of containing and sealing away both the radiance and the infection. However, most were discarded, because only one was truly suitable to contain the infection. The White Palace, home of the Pale King, and the center of Hallownest. Located within the ancient basin, this was where the king conducted his affairs and oversaw the people of Hallownest. He was attended by many royal retainers, with the king's mold serving as his guards, beings forged from void as part of the king's experiments. But one day, the palace, along with the king himself, simply vanished without a trace. For a long time, it remained unclear where exactly they had gone, though the reason for their disappearance was far less ambiguous. The infection had resurfaced. In an effort to contain it, the king chose the vessel that would seal away the radiance, imprisoning it within the Temple of the Black Egg. To safeguard the seal, 3 bugs of Hallownest were chosen to become the Dreamers. In order to contain the radiance, they were placed into an eternal sleep. Monomon the Teacher, Lurien the Watcher, and Hera the Beast. Despite the Spider Tribe's animosity towards Hallownest, it was the Pale King himself who approached Hera and asked her to become a Dreamer. She agreed, but under one condition: that the two of them would have a child together. You see, her tribe was afflicted with a curse, one that made it nearly impossible to bear children. Perhaps due to the Pale King's power, it would be possible for the two of them to sire a child. And so, Hornet was born. With their pact fulfilled, Hera joined the other 2 Dreamers in eternal sleep, protecting the temple and keeping the pure vessel sealed safely within. However, herein lies the problem. The vessel that was meant to perfectly contain the radiance and the infection had been corrupted by an idea instilled. You see, because the radiance possesses power over dreams, and because the infection is not simply physical, the vessel meant to contain it had to be seemingly empty. But due to the bond formed between father and child, the vessel became impure, and so the infection couldn't be fully contained. Eventually, even the bugs and the corpses within the kingdom's walls would reanimate and begin serving the radiance. The White Lady and the Pale King had many children. Many vessels were created in the hope that one might successfully contain the infection. However, because only a single vessel was chosen, the others were discarded and abandoned within the abyss. And yet, somehow a few managed to escape. Though countless still remain within that dark trench, some vessels found their way out into the wider world. Eventually, the Radiance's influence grew too powerful, as the vessel containing it steadily lost more and more of its strength. In time, its shell began to crack, and the screams echoing within its mind rang out for all to hear, even those living beyond the borders of Hallownest. A select few warriors answered the call. Among them was Quirrell, apprentice to Monomon the Teacher. Having once left Hallownest before eventually returning, he answered the call of his master while carrying the mask she had entrusted to him, as a form of protection. Because he had traveled so far beyond the kingdom, where the influence of the Pale King could no longer reach him, much of his memory had faded. Yet through dreams, fragments still remained. The capital, the crossroads, even the resting place of his old teacher. And once he returned to those cliffs again, he encountered the daughter of the Pale King. At first, Hornet mistook Quirrell for a mere intruder, but upon seeing the mask he carried, she recognized its original owner and allowed him to pass. Hornet acts as a protector of the fallen kingdom, driving away those who would seek to desecrate it. Having heard the cry of the Radiance herself, she now traverses Hallownest in search of answers. Unbeknownst to her, however, someone else has also returned to the kingdom. One of the vessels of the Abyss, one that had somehow managed to escape its confinement, had finally returned to the land of its birth after hearing the call. Having traveled far beyond the kingdom, the knight had lost most, if not all, of its memories, and yet despite this, it was still compelled to answer the call of the light. The knight first arrives in Dirtmouth, where it is greeted by Elderbug. Despite being the oldest resident of Dirtmouth, so much time has passed since the fall of Hallownest that, within his lifetime, the kingdom has always been this way. Broken, abandoned, dead. After offering the knight some advice, he watches as it descends into the well below, the last remaining entrance into the ruined kingdom. And what awaits beneath is far worse. The reanimated corpses of bugs, animated by the Radiance's influence, litter the caverns. The crossroads stand abandoned. What once served as a bustling trade route has now become the hunting grounds of rotting, decaying beasts. Only a single stag still remains, and the stagways themselves, while mostly intact, haven't seen proper operation in years. Greenpath, having remained relatively undisturbed for so long, has flourished despite the kingdom's collapse. Its plant life grows wildly throughout the region, reclaiming what Hallownest once built. Even so, the infection has spread here as well, and the forest still rests among ancient ruins. The Queen's Gardens, once meticulously cared for, have become almost entirely overgrown. No matter where one travels within Hallownest, every corner of the kingdom has fallen into decay. Even the once great capital city is now overflowing with reanimated corpses. And despite being known today as a city of tears, it was not always called by that name. The endless rain cascading from the ceiling above, from Blue Lake, is something new. There has been no maintenance within the kingdom for a very long time, and because the cracks above were never repaired, the capital slowly flooded over time, giving rise to its current name. What was once a center of research and learning within the city has since become a graveyard of despair. The scholars who once sought to expand the minds of bugs eventually redirected their research toward combating the infection. In an attempt to harness the power of soul, they harvested it from the soul totems left behind by the ancient civilization that worshipped the void, and extracted it from countless bugs. Despite all their efforts, cruel as they were, it amounted to nothing. Eventually, the scholars themselves succumbed to the infection. The knight certainly has much to face on its journey. Speaking of which, the knight's journey first takes him through the crossroads, and then into Greenpath, where he encounters Hornet. Unaware that she is, in fact, his sister, she refuses to allow the knight to pass, and the two clash in battle. They cross paths several times throughout the knight's journey, though these encounters are less about stopping him and more about testing him, a test to determine whether the knight is truly worthy of the task ahead. After her defeat, the knight first encounters the three dreamers. They attempt to halt him in his tracks, but our little guy proves tougher than expected. He encounters them once again within the resting grounds. This time, they attempt to trap him within a dream in order to preserve the seal. But the knight is saved by the seer, who grants him the Dream Nail, a sacred weapon once kept in possession of the Moth tribe, as they awaited the appearance of its rightful wielder. This weapon possesses the power to cut through the veil separating the waking world from the world of dreams. With it, the knight is able to escape. Now the mission becomes clear. Travel throughout the Fallen Kingdom, uncover its mysteries, reveal the kingdom's past, and your own. Awaken the dreamers so that the pure vessel may be freed, and the Radiance's influence over Hallownest may finally come to an end. Along his journey, the knight encounters many strange foes and unusual characters alike. Among them is the Grim Troop, a seemingly harmless band of traveling performers. In truth, however, their purpose is to carry out a ritual, meant to sustain the Nightmare's heart, a higher being that exists at the center of the Nightmare Realm. Long ago, the Nightmare Realm was once part of the Greater Dream Realm, but eventually it split away, becoming a realm all its own. The Nightmare's heart possesses two spawns, the Grimchild and the troop's master, Grim. Both serve as vessels for the heart within the physical world. The ritual they seek to perform consists of two stages as well. First, the Grimchild is fed nightmare flames, embers gathered from ruined lands that serve as fuel for the heart itself. Then comes the second step, the slaying of the Nightmare King, so that he may be reborn anew through the child. After being summoned by the knight using the Nightmare Lantern, the troop establishes itself within Dirtmouth. From there, the knight is tasked with aiding them in completing the ritual, eventually facing off against the Nightmare King himself. And after his defeat, the troop vanishes before the knight awakens, as though they had never been there at all. The knight continues his journey throughout all of Hallownest, continuing to free tormented souls from the Radiance's grasp. Along the way, he gathers essence in order to awaken the Dream Nail, and eventually discovers the King Soul after obtaining the mark of the worm, the King Brand, taken from the corpse of the worm. By collecting essence from spirits, whispering roots, and the dreams of fallen warriors, the knight is finally able to fully awaken the Dream Nail as well. The King Soul is a sacred emblem of sorts. It symbolizes the union between two higher beings, the White Lady and the Pale King. And speaking of those two, the White Lady can be found within her home in the Queen's Gardens. Her body is bound, though this imprisonment was not forced upon her by another. Rather, she chose it willingly, out of shame, for her role in the creation of the vessels. Should the knight travel to the ancient basin and descend deeper into the abyss, he discovers not only his place of birth, but also the very location where the White Palace once stood. And upon using the dream nail on a fallen king's mold, he is transported to the White Palace. After navigating the palace's treacherous halls, the knight discovers the king. Dead. His corpse sits motionless upon the throne. The once great ruler who transformed Hallownest from nothing but darkness and void into a land of prosperity has now been reduced to nothing more than an empty shell. Now, this enters theory territory, but I can't help but wonder, if the Pale King shed his shell once before, transforming from a worm into the form of a bug, could he have shed himself once again and abandoned these lands entirely? Perhaps he brought the palace into the dream realm and died or shed there. Or perhaps he shed within Hallownest itself, and though there was no great conflict, transformed into something that witnessed the kingdom's destruction, before ultimately moving on from these lands altogether. Whatever the truth may be, from the perspective of Hallownest, both the palace and its king abandoned them. Obtaining the king's soul brings the knight one final step closer to his goal. Now only one place remains: the Abyss, the place where everything began. From the ancient civilization that once worshipped the void, to the birthplace and graveyard of the vessels themselves, the knight must return there one final time in order to obtain the power needed to destroy the false light. Void, as we know, is normally unpredictable and highly dangerous. You would be a fool to even approach a body of pure void. This almost eldritch substance reaches upward with tendrils that tear apart anything unfortunate enough to get too close. If dreams are light and nightmares are hellish flame, then perhaps the void is what lies between. Kind of nothingness. Not necessarily evil, yet far from good. It resembles almost the blackness of space, reflected not only in its color and emptiness, but also in the void's almost cosmic, incomprehensible nature. The writhing tendrils, the endless dark, it all carries an almost otherworldly quality to it. And yet, despite this, the void possesses something that's strangely alluring. A beckoning emptiness. Perhaps that ancient civilization from long ago found comfort within that same darkness. Promise of silence, of nothingness, of release. The shades that now haunt the abyss belong to the many vessels abandoned by the king and queen, remnants of fallen children, failed warriors that were never given the chance to become anything more than that. With the king's soul in hand, the knight descends to the deepest reaches of the abyss and discovers his old cocoon. The Void Heart, the darkness hidden behind the mask, is finally revealed. The emptiness within you, the knight's true form, the void itself can now be unified under your will. One step closer to stopping the radiance. And one step closer to becoming a higher being yourself. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Even with the dreamers gone, one final stop remains before venturing into the Temple of the Black Egg. Beyond the now infected crossroads, things are getting worse. We don't have much time left. And before we enter the temple, it's worth mentioning that the Grim Troop were not the only travelers the knight encountered on his journey. There were also the Godseekers. Hailing from the land of storms, the Godseekers once served gods of thunder and rain. But in time, those gods passed away, leaving the Godseekers without any deities left to worship. Though there were once many individual Godseekers, they eventually fused themselves into the mind of a single being through the use of a sacred mask, passed down through generations. Using a special tuning device, they began searching for new gods to attune themselves to, and eventually, their search led them to Hallownest. They were drawn here by the lingering power of the Pale King. The Godseekers came to these lands in search of a new god to worship. The knight first discovers the main Godseeker, the one whose mind all the others now reside within the Junk Pit, sealed inside a strange sarcophagus. It's possible that this sarcophagus served as some kind of cocoon. Upon entering their mind, the knight arrives within Godhome, a dream realm created by the Godseekers, so they might attune themselves to the voices of gods through ritualistic combat. By challenging powerful beings in battle, they seek to ascend to greater heights and eventually discover the God of Gods. Interestingly, the Godseekers and the ancient civilization of the Abyss seem to share a similar motivation for worship. The Godseekers sought salvation from their silent minds, while those who worshiped the Void longed for it to cleanse them entirely. Within Godhome, the knight can once again battle many of the foes encountered throughout the journey. And should the knight ascend to the highest peak, they may confront the true form of the source behind the infection. But once again, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now that the knight has slain the dreamers and broken the seal, awakened the dream nail, and obtained the Void Heart, he can finally enter the Temple of the Black Egg. Inside, it's dark and silent. As the knight ventures deeper into the temple, he finally finds him, no longer pure. The vessel has been horribly corrupted by the infection. The Hollow Knight. The battle that follows is brutal and violent. After enduring the Radiance's influence for so long, the Hollow Knight has almost completely lost control of itself. In brief moments of resistance, the vessel attempts to stop itself, driving its own nail through its stomach in a desperate effort to contain the infection. But even that isn't enough to halt its rampage. The assault continues until eventually What follows is a long and arduous battle, made even harsher after the struggle against the Hollow Knight. But eventually, their siblings, the other vessels, rise to restrain the Radiance, and with one final strike, the Knight drags the false light down into the darkness. Hollow Knight features multiple endings, each concluding the story in a different way. If the Knight defeats the Hollow Knight before obtaining the Void Heart, having only slain the Dreamers, then the Knight takes the infection upon themselves. In doing so, they become the new vessel, sealing away the Radiance. However, if the Knight defeats the Radiance, then both the Knight and their siblings return to the Void together. There is also another variation. When Hornet restrains the vessel, if the Knight takes too long to use the Dream Nail, Hornet's knocked unconscious and the battle continues as normal. Like the first ending, the Knight is ultimately sealed away, but this time, so is Hornet. It is heavily implied that Hornet herself becomes part of the seal somehow, replacing the role once held by the Dreamers. And finally, returning once more to Godhome, if the Knight ascends to the very peak and defeats the true form of the Radiance within Godhome, they transform into the Void Entity, a higher being that the Godseekers themselves refer to as the God of Gods. A being so powerful that the Radiance isn't merely dragged into the darkness, she's utterly destroyed by it. Afterward, the entity turns its attention toward the main Godseeker and destroys them as well. Void then begins leaking from the Godseeker's physical body in the real world. What happens after this remains unclear, but it certainly doesn't appear good. If the delicate flower is delivered to the Godseeker from the Grey Mourner beforehand, a slightly different ending occurs. In this version, the flower halts the spread of the Void, and both the Void and the Godseeker vanish together in a flash of light. Oh, and the Hollow Knight breaks free from the temple, so good luck with that, Hornet. Harsh winds, coarse, dry sands. This is a land unforgiving to any who attempt to traverse it. Violent sandstorms blanket the surrounding landscape, making travel difficult, and for all but the hardiest of creatures, survival is nearly impossible. But this place was not always like this. Turn back the sands of time, and a very different world is revealed. Towers of coral stretched toward the sky, and flowing between them ran clear, pristine, crystalline rivers. Once, life here wasn't only sustainable, it thrived. The bugs who lived in these lands were strong, capable warriors, known as the Order of Karak, serving beneath their leader, Crust King Khan. He believed deeply in strength, and his order embodied that ideal. At the height of their power, nearly half of the region fell under their influence, and there were few, if any, who could stand against them. Elsewhere stood a great forest, born from a single seed. At its heart rested Nilith. She shaped the land and shared a connection with every living creature within the forest. Through her power, the woodland remained a place of peace, offering safe passage to all who walked beneath its canopy. Beyond the forests of Shellwood, in the lowlands of the region, lay the Farfields and Hunter's March. These lands were ruled by the Scar, a fierce tribe of deadly warriors led by their song queen, Carmelita. When she was young, Carmelita used her voice to unite the Scar beneath a single banner. A formidable warrior in her own right, she guided her people through song, her voice granting strength to those who followed her. Far beyond even the Farfields lay Verdania, a land of lush greenery, beautiful rivers, and creatures that seem as though they stepped straight from a fairy tale. The region was ruled by the Green Prince and his partner, their domain stretching across the far reaches of the land. And above it all rested Pale Lake, whose waters flowed down into the caverns below, creating an ideal home for the Stilken who dwelled there. Eventually, however, the lakes of the region became heavily polluted, affecting the creatures that depended on them and forcing them to adapt in order to survive. Verdania would eventually die out entirely. The Scar endured, but their influence and power were greatly diminished. Nyla's strength began to fade as well, and as her power waned, the violent and territorial Splinter Tribe rose to prominence. They began hunting the many bugs that lived within or simply passed through the forests of Shellwood. As for the Karak, their water supply was cut off. Without it, their order slowly perished, and their once vibrant, colorful homeland was reduced to the dry, weathered browns we see in the present day. But what caused all of this? Why did these lands fall into decline? Why did these great bugs disappear, weaken, or fade away? The answer lies with a single being. A higher being. She arrived in the land now known as Farloom, and through her power, she transformed several Farlids into something greater. She granted them sapience, strength, and purpose. The Weavers. She told them they were her daughters, that they were divine. A lie, of course, but the children knew no different. Through song, they would sustain her light and preserve her power, and under her rule their devotion was absolute. The Weavers possessed many unique abilities. By weaving their own soul into silk, they could create threads infused with their very essence. This silk was an incredibly powerful and versatile tool, capable of being used in a myriad of ways, even extending one's lifespan. And much like the higher being who empowered them, the Weavers possessed a natural inclination toward leadership and rule. In time, they sought to consolidate power beneath themselves. They constructed the Citadel, and at the height of their civilization, the Cradle, a sacred place where Grandmother Silk was soothed by the prayers and songs of those below. Yet, there was one Weaver who uncovered the truth. She learned of their true origins, and discovered her mother's deception, and she rejected her. For this, she was found guilty of the sin of apostasy. Bound in chains and sealed away, she was imprisoned for her defiance. The Citadel, the colossal monolith that towers above Farloom, stretching ever upward toward the surface. The Weavers truly outdid themselves. The place is massive, built not only as the Mother's Cage, but also as a religious center governing the entirety of Farloom. The Citadel stands as the heart of the kingdom. Countless bugs labored to construct it, and many more were tasked with guarding and preserving it. Among them were the Vault Keepers, caretakers of the Citadel's vaults. These chambers contain prayers, secrets, and the history of Farloom. Led by the Pontiff, the vaults house an incredible wealth of knowledge. There were also the Architects, mechanical constructs charged with creation. Their duty was to automate and maintain the systems that sustain both the Citadel and Farloom as a whole. It was they who created the Cogwork Core that stands at the Citadel's center. The core was designed to operate indefinitely. The massive cylinders housed within it produced song without end, ensuring that the Mother remained contained. Then there were the highest among them, the Conductors. Second only to the Weavers, the Conductors governed the Citadel and issued decrees from the high halls. They were served by the Maestros and Ministers, and together these three groups were entrusted with the threefold melody. By learning all three parts of this song, one could ascend from the core to the cradle, where the higher beings slept. The bugs of Farloom were called upon to undertake a pilgrimage to the Citadel. They were told if they crossed the kingdom's harsh lands, from the deserts below to the poisoned waters beyond, and reached the gate, they would be serving a holy purpose. The pilgrims believed the Citadel to be a paradise. They believed it could heal their wounds. They believed a great reward awaited them at the end of their journey. 5 bell shrines stand throughout Lower Farloom, and once they are rung, the pilgrims must make their way to the Grand Gate. Those deemed unworthy were slain upon the blasted steps. The fortunate few were chosen to ascend toward the cradle, through the threefold melody. Most others were admitted into the Citadel's choir, while others were assigned to labor within the underworks. What none of them knew, though, was that they were being used. Used to keep the Mother asleep. Used so the Weavers could maintain their rule over the land. The bugs of Farloom were never really granted rest. The facility known as Whiteward served as a place where the sick, the dying, and the exhausted were infused with silk. The process prolonged their lives, allowing them to continue serving the Citadel for, well, forever. And those who could no longer sing, they were transformed into silk flies. Through the use of a silk siphon, their original bodies were discarded, and they were repurposed to guide the pilgrims below. As for the layout of the Citadel, it consists of several distinct regions. First, there is the aforementioned Whiteward, then the Whispering Vaults, where the Citadel's entire history is stored, the Cogwork Core, which sustains the Citadel's endless song, the Memoriam, where the histories of Farloom's many regions and habitats are preserved. There is, of course, the Grand Gate, which serves as the entrance to the Citadel, and the Coral Chambers, the golden halls that make up the majority of the Citadel's interior. This is where most of the choir members reside, along with those who have completed their pilgrimage. Beyond all of this, at the very top of the Citadel lie the High Halls, where the masters of the Citadel once resided. The bugs of the Citadel would worship the Weavers, creating effigies in their likeness and offering praise and prayer. The weavers constructed multiple weave nests across Farloom, even one near the abyss. These hidden caverns were used for research and experimentation, and each was named after a weaver: Absalom, Atla, Sindril, Karn, and Merglin. These names would later be revered by pilgrims, who offered them prayers in exchange for healing and guidance. Weave Nest Atla in particular was the largest of all the weave nests. It served a specific purpose. You see, despite the intricate system the weavers had constructed, the lies they spun weren't enough to preserve their dream forever. They understood that, eventually, the mother would awaken and reclaim rule from her daughters. They built tools, systems, and traps in an attempt to escape the mother's grasp, but despite all their research and effort, their attempts ultimately proved unsuccessful. In these experiments, the weavers weren't only attempting to escape the mother's grasp, they were also trying to overcome the curse that afflicted their kind. If you recall, it is incredibly difficult for weavers to have children. In an effort to bypass this limitation, they began experimenting with life itself. Using rune and shell, they created Eva. Her entire life has been spent within an iron cage. The structure provides her with nutrients she needs to survive, but the small house that sustains her will also serve as her tomb. A life confined to a tiny pod, unable to leave, and unable to truly live. Despite being one of the Weaver's own creations, she was eventually abandoned when they fled the Citadel for lands unknown. After all, their plans to trap the higher being had failed, and if they could not stop the mother from awakening, they had no desire to remain when she finally rose, only to be crushed for their trespass. Or worse. Within Weave Nest Sindril, they mapped out their escape. Most who remained behind all eventually perished, waiting in vain to be saved by one of their own. And so, the rule of Farloom was left in the hands of the conductors. At first, it might seem as though the kingdom had finally been freed from the Weaver's harsh rule. But things would only get worse. Silk would not remain asleep forever, and she was becoming increasingly desperate to awaken. While Grandmother Silk slept, her daughters harvested her threads. That silk was used throughout the Citadel, and indeed throughout Farloom as a whole. The region of Greymoor, which lay beneath the Citadel, was tasked with collecting and processing the silk dregs that drifted down from above. There were catchers, snippers, and rakers, each responsible for catching, rolling, and cutting the silk within Greymoor's towering structures so that it could be sent back up to the Citadel. And all of this processing serves to illustrate one important fact. Silk was everywhere. Whitewood used it in surgery, the Citadel's machinery relied upon it, countless constructs throughout Farloom were built with it, Greymoor worked tirelessly to ensure that not a single thread went to waste. Silk permeated every corner of the kingdom. It was in buildings, in the machines, in the water, even in the air. And
therein lies the problem. Because, Grandmother Silk was the source of all silk. If she were ever to awaken and reclaim control over those threads, the consequences would be catastrophic. So, of course, that's exactly what happened. Silk was desperate to awaken. She seized control of the threads spread throughout Farloom, and used them to bind the kingdom's bugs beneath her will, whether they were living or dead. Thus began the haunting. It started within the Citadel and gradually spread throughout the entirety of Farloom. No corner of the kingdom was beyond Silk's reach. Those bound by her threads were driven to madness and terrible violence. Her goal was simple: to weave every bug in Farloom into a single unified force, eternally devoted to her. By this point, the Weavers had long since abandoned the kingdom, and the haunting had plagued Farloom for many years. Eventually, a decree was issued. The Haunted were commanded to seek out the Weavers and their descendants beyond the borders of the Citadel, and bring them back so that Silk could fully awaken and restore her power. One decree in particular reads, "Full chamber to the kingdom of the White Worm. Claim the Weaver in half-part. Last of their line, sent strong with Silk. Resistance anticipated. Quell with Rune Cage." Probably not the best way to start your journey.
Friend!
Weakened by the rune cage that imprisoned her, Hornet is in a far weaker state than she was back in Hallownest. Say what you will about the Weavers, but their magic and technology truly are something else. What was it that shattered the cage above? Had it not broken when it did, Hornet's life may very well have been forfeit. We'll come back to that mystery later. For now, we have a grotto to climb. After ascending to the top, she collapses, still weakened by her earlier imprisonment. She later awakens in the care of a local chapel maid. Through her, Hornet is given her first objective: make her way to the very top of Lower Farloom and enter the golden halls of the Citadel that loom above the kingdom. Her journey begins in Bone Bottom, a starting point for many pilgrims seeking to reach the Citadel. Here she encounters numerous travelers, among them the cheerful little beacon of light known as Sherma, who is also attempting to make his way to the heights above. Eventually, Hornet reaches the docks. These docks were constructed by the Citadel to extract and process metal, along with many other valuable resources. It's here that Hornet encounters a young bug named Lace. Like the Weavers, Lace was born from Grandmother Silk. Unlike them, however, she wasn't born of arachnid flesh. She was created entirely from silk, fashioned to serve as one of the mother's loyal subjects. The same is true of her sister Phantom. Yet while Lace remained in the mother's favor, Phantom did not. Discarded and abandoned, Phantom was condemned to endlessly operate the exhaust organ, the great machine responsible for producing the mist that blankets portions of Lower Farloom. Lace, however, was given a different purpose. The two quickly come to blows, with Lace promising to spare Hornet the trouble of climbing all the way to the Citadel, by defeating her right then and there. Thankfully, our little worm spider thing isn't easy to kill. Belhart, an entire town nestled within a Belvane. What was once a settlement for passing pilgrims on their journey to the Citadel has now been taken over by Widow, a weaver who, unlike most of her kin, remains loyal to Grandmother Silk. Her own Silk has been bound with pins driven through her spine, and her mask has been forcibly removed. From her perch, she guides Silk down from the Citadel to Belhart, using it to hold the town's inhabitants captive and string them up like puppets. Upon arriving, Hornet is met with a truly grisly sight. Bugs bound by thread, suspended in the air like grotesque ornaments. It does make you wonder, is Widow genuinely devoted to the mother, or is this simply a case of extreme Stockholm Syndrome? Either way, once Hornet defeats her, the citizens of Belhart are finally freed, and the climb can continue. You know, I gotta admit, I was genuinely surprised when I first saw Widow. Specifically her head. Given the size of the Weaver's masks, I had always assumed their actual heads were enormous as well. Apparently not. Those masks really are just that big. Jeez. Beyond Belhart lie Shellwood and the Blasted Steppes, the final obstacle standing between Hornet and the Grand Gate. And after defeating the last judge, Hornet can finally reach the place so many pilgrims have dreamed of. The gilded halls of the Citadel stretch out before her. Like the pilgrims who came before, Hornet must now obtain the threefold melody. Unfortunately, the Citadel is a far more dangerous place than it once was. Thanks to the haunting, it's become little more than a massive death trap. After fighting her way through hordes of haunted bugs, she eventually arrives at Songclave. Like Bone Bottom and Belhart before it, this settlement serves as a resting place for pilgrims as they make their way through the Citadel. There, she meets the caretaker. As his name suggests, he watches over Songclave and, somewhat reluctantly, looks after its residents, although at first there aren't any. Thankfully, Hornet's quick to remedy that. Throughout her journey, Hornet encounters numerous travelers and pilgrims. By ringing the bell, she encourages many of them to gather here. It's a welcome reprieve from the dangers ahead, allowing us to spend time with the bugs we've met throughout our adventure. But eventually the journey must continue. Making her way into the Whispering Vaults, Hornet encounters Vault Keeper Cadinius, the last surviving member of the Vault Keepers. He's searching for the lost psalm cylinders, and after returning the sacred cylinder to him, she's rewarded with the first part of the threefold melody. Next comes the Cogwork Core. It's honestly a wonder any pilgrim ever managed to traverse these halls at all. Assuming you can even call them halls. After ascending through the core and completing one of its intricate musical mechanisms, she obtains the second part of the melody. Only one piece remains. The final ascent leads to the high halls. Reaching them is no simple matter, as Hornet must first survive a brutal gauntlet of enemies standing in her way. At the summit, she finds Balador, the last living conductor. Now frail and bedridden, he survives only through the silk that remains connected to him. From Balador, Hornet learns the final part of the threefold melody, and with the song complete, she can finally ascend to the cradle and confront the source of the haunting. You didn't think that would be the last we saw of her, did you? We finally learn the truth of her origin. She was created entirely from silk, born by the mother herself to be loyal and to serve her. With her finally out of the way, Hornet can at last, for real this time, confront Grandmother Silk. Oh, and it's revealed that she was the one that freed Hornet from captivity. When Hornet reaches the cradle, the mother still rests within her enormous cocoon. Just look at all of that silk. And remember, we're not talking about your grandmother's knitting supplies here. Every thread was created from her very soul. It would take an incredibly powerful being not only to manipulate their soul in such a way, but to possess enough of it to create something on this scale. And that is exactly the kind of being Hornet is about to face. The battle itself is intense and chaotic. Silk uses every tool at her disposal in an attempt to crush her granddaughter and reassert her dominion over Farloom. It's a brutal struggle, but eventually Hornet's able to land the finishing blow. If Hornet chooses to bind the mother, she is able to take Silk's place atop Farloom, bringing the kingdom under the rule of a half-weaver, half-worm. And if you thought Silk's rule was frightening, imagine being governed by a creature that isn't only weaver, but worm as well. And again, perhaps the worm half would prove to be Farloom's saving grace. Who can say? Still, this ending isn't exactly satisfying. After all, we'd like to see Farloom freed from the rule of the weavers entirely. And that's where these three come in. The chapel maid, the hermit, and the caretaker. They aren't quite what they seem at first. Here's a question for you. If the chapel maid is, well, a chapel maid, then what chapel does she actually serve? The chapel near Bone Bottom was never dedicated to the Citadel. Those who worshipped there followed an entirely different belief system. Exactly what they worshipped remains unclear, but considering what the caretaker is about to reveal to us, it isn't particularly difficult to make an educated guess. When Hornet speaks with him, he agrees to help her find another way to defeat the mother. Together they set out to create a soul snare, a device capable of binding Silk so that she may finally be defeated once and for all. But that raises an important question. Then, if the soul snare is meant to bind the mother, then what exactly is she being bound to? Before it became known as Bilewater, its waters were clear and thriving. But when the Citadel poisoned those waters, the Stilken were furious. Their homeland had been ruined. They adapted, yes, but if given the chance, they would have gladly seen the Citadel torn down stone by stone. Eventually, they were approached by a snail shaman. The shaman understood the Stilken's suffering. Like them, he had been wronged by the Citadel. He followed a different belief system, one the Citadel refused to tolerate, and so he sought to work alongside the Stilken to bring the Citadel's rule crashing down. The partnership never came to be. Whether through distrust, rage, or both, the Stilken killed the shaman and claimed his soul for themselves. Their chieftain would go on to wield that soul as a weapon. A snail shaman, though. Whenever they're involved, Soul and Void never seem far behind. In order to complete the soul snare, Hornet must gather the souls of 3 individuals: the Hermit, the Chapel Maid, and the Seeker. And if you haven't pieced it together by now, all 3 are snail shamans. The true purpose of the Caretaker's plan finally becomes clear. The soul snare was never intended to simply bind Silk. It was designed to bind her to the Void, to cast her into the darkness below and allow the Void to consume her. Perhaps even consume all of Farloom alongside her. Hornet, however, remains unaware of the full implications. Trusting the Caretaker, she places the soul snare and awakens its power. The trap springs. Silk is bound. This feels familiar. The void now stretches across Farloom. its dark tendrils seizing control of the threads once wielded by the mother. Her shrieks echo throughout the kingdom as she struggles against the darkness below, desperately attempting to save her daughter as both are dragged into the depths. Farloom is not saved, far from it. In fact, its end is rapidly approaching. First order of business: escape the cradle and find that snail. The bugs of Farloom are no longer merely haunted. They are being consumed entirely by black tendrils of void, now weaving themselves through silk-sewn threads. Upon returning to the chapel near Bone Bottom, Hornet confronts the family of shamans. They're initially surprised that she isn't pleased with the outcome. Gee, I wonder why. Hornet heroically declares that she will descend into the abyss in order to stop the void's consumption of Farloom and to save Lace. So, once again, she travels through the deep docks, and with the help of Ballo, an employee of the docks, she uses an old vessel to descend into the abyss. We just can't catch a break, can we? Well, here we are. The deep, dark abyss below. Do you see what I see? Those shells. Are they rolled up bug corpses? I mean, some bugs do tend to curl up when they die. On the other hand, it's never explicitly stated that the snails are remnants of that civilization. But I mean, we're about as close as we can get to it being true, without the game outright confirming it. She eventually makes her way to the Sea of Void, and finds none other than Lace, or rather, a projection of her. In order to save her, Hornet must descend into the Sea of Black. There's just one problem. With her current equipment, such a journey would be impossible. No one could enter that watery darkness and survive. At least, not without a source of pure light, an Everbloom. But where could one possibly find an Everbloom in Farloom? After an insanely cool escape sequence, Hornet returns to the chapel and enlists the aid of the shamans. Through their magic, she's given a way forward. By entering her own memories, Hornet may be able to reclaim the flower once given to her by her stepmother, the White Lady. But a spell of this magnitude requires an immense amount of power. Power equal to that of the mother. There is, however, a way to obtain it. If Hornet can gather the hearts of beings whose power rivals that of the higher ones. The Old Ones. The ancient rulers who watched over Farloom, long before the monarch seized control. The shamans teach Hornet the Elegy of the Deep, an ancient song capable of reaching across into memory itself. By locating the resting places of these forgotten rulers and performing the melody upon her needlein, Hornet can enter their minds and claim their hearts. The Order of Karak. What remains of the Order now resides within an ancient structure buried beneath the sands of Karak. Their shells, once proud and gleaming red, have been marred by weather and age. Yet despite how much time has passed, they still stand watch around their leader with unwavering loyalty. Nylith, whose memory the Citadel reluctantly honored with a statue near the Grand Gate, has long since passed on. In her absence, a warrior named Seth was charged with a sacred duty: to guard Shellwood's heart forever. Then there's Carmelita, once a mighty queen of song whose voice inspired her warriors and protected them from the haunting. She now hides away, old and frail, The power of her voice and the influence it once carried barely sustains what remains of her people. And finally, Verdania. What was once a sprawling realm of lush greenery and natural splendor has been reduced to a single corridor near Greymoor. All that remains of its former majesty is the Green Prince himself. His partner sacrificed both life and soul in exchange for Verdania's safety, but the Citadel never upheld its end of the bargain. By entering the memories of these ancient rulers and besting them in combat, Hornet is able to claim their hearts. With the hearts gathered, she returns to the shamans, who finally possess the power necessary to guide her into her own mind and retrieve the Everbloom. There, she relives fragments of her past, memories of her infancy, among her own kind, Deep Nest, her mother Hera, her training in the Hive. Though Hornet's ties to Farloom and the Weavers run deep, it becomes clear that Hera wanted something different for her daughter. She wished for her daughter to seek a path beyond the ambition and hunger for rule that so often defined the Weavers. As both Weaver and Worm, Hornet possessed a power unlike any other. Even Vespa understood that there would always be those who sought to claim that power for themselves. And so Hornet presses deeper into her memories, until at last she encounters her former stepmother one final time. From her, Hornet reclaims the Everbloom, now carrying a light pure enough to withstand the darkness below. She can finally descend into the murky depths of the void. Descent back into the void isn't quite as bad this time, at least. Ballo reinforced the diving bell, allowing Hornet to avoid another catastrophic crash landing. Upon reaching the shores of the Void Sea once more, she encounters Lace again. She warns Hornet that whatever awaits below is no longer truly her. It seems she's been almost entirely consumed by the void. Almost. Even if only a small part of Lace remains, that's still worth saving. Protected by the Everbloom's pure light, Hornet is able to resist the tendrils of the void and descend into the black at the bottom of the world, where she confronts Lace one final time.
Kestra.
The mother has been all but consumed, and the daughter, well, despite Silk's efforts, as Lace herself foretold, she's no longer the same person she once was, and what follows is one hell of a fight. When possessed by the void, one becomes stronger. Lace has lost none of her skill, none of her speed, and none of her deadly precision. If anything, she's become even more dangerous. The Void makes excellent use of her body. A master swordsman fused with the relentless ferocity of the Void is a terrifying combination. As the battle rages on, the sea of void rises around them. The cocoon woven by the mother threatens to collapse, and with every strike of Hornet's needle, Lace is freed, if only a little more, from the darkness consuming her. The struggle is fierce, but eventually, Hornet prevails. After one final clash, she succeeds in breaking the Void's hold over Lace and pulls her back from the brink. With the aid of Grandmother Silk, the two manage to soar toward the surface just in time. Or so it seems. The Everbloom has reached its limit. Even its pure light cannot withstand the Void forever. And as hope begins to fade, a familiar presence emerges from the darkness. Together with their siblings, they rise from the depths and guide Hornet and Lace safely back to the surface. At long last, Farloom is free. Free from the Mother's control, free from the influence of the Void, and for the first time in a very long time, its people are finally unbound by the threads that binded them. I've spent a lot of time with Hollow Knight over the past year. I've studied its lore extensively, played through both games to near 100% completion, and dived as deep as I possibly could to find answers to many of the series' questions. There are many ways to interpret a story. I think it would be silly to say there's only one thing to gain from a piece of art, unless the art's meaning is explicitly stated by the creator. It can be quite fun to see what different people take away from it. Hollow Knight, as a series, places quite the focus on religion. It's a topic the games themselves bring up quite a bit, with both the myriad of gods that appear and how they interact with the game's overarching narrative. Are the games critical of faith as a whole? Is it the typical religion bad story? I don't think so. I've made my faith known through some of my videos. And while I'd say I'm far from a good example of what a Christian should be, sharing my faith isn't something I would ever shy away from. I hesitate to throw the baby out with the bathwater. These are two incredible games, and they're genuinely gorgeous. And like I said, religion bad isn't what I personally think they're going for here. Everyone takes away something different. Here's how I personally interpret these stories, put simply: Satan's false light and blind faith. The citizens of Farloom never question their faith. They walk blindly into danger to serve a being that ultimately doesn't have their best interests at heart. They surrender themselves completely, never stopping to ask whether the path they walk is truly good, whether the voice they follow is worthy of their trust, or whether the miracles they witness are signs of divinity or deception. This is where I think Silksong becomes particularly interesting. As a Christian, I don't see the game's message as faith is bad. We can look to Sherma as an example of this. The very last thing he does is pray for Hornet's safety. Rather, I see it as a warning against blind faith. Faith that's divorced from discernment. The bugs of Farloom believe because they're told to believe. They obey because everyone around them obeys. They never test what they're taught. They never question the foundation beneath their feet. Christianity repeatedly warns against this very thing. Christians are called to seek truth, test teachings, examine prophets, and judge things by their fruits. Faith isn't meant to be blind obedience to the nearest voice claiming authority. It's meant to be rooted in truth. Evidence-based faith is a thing, after all. The tragedy of Farloom isn't that its people believed in something. The tragedy is that they never stopped to ask if what they believed was true. And because of this, they're being taken advantage of by a system that seeks to control them and bind them, rather than something that frees you and gives you peace. As for the first game, the Radiance isn't presented as a horned demon or some obviously evil force. She's a being of pure light. She appears in dreams, beckoning bugs to join her. Those dreams slowly break their minds, and the infection takes hold, stripping away their sense of self until they serve the Radiance mindlessly. And I find that imagery fascinating. The Bible repeatedly warns that evil often masquerades as good, and even describes Satan as appearing as an angel of light. The infection itself also reminds me somewhat of the mark of the beast, a force that spreads across an entire kingdom, bringing countless individuals beneath a single will. Whether intentional or not, it's a rather interesting parallel. The infection spreads beneath what is supposedly a beautiful light, and those who embrace it gradually lose themselves. I really enjoyed my time with this franchise, and I can't wait to tackle the DLC for Silksong when that eventually releases. Till then, God bless, and thanks for watching.